Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Horlick-Romanowski, and I am assistant professor in the Department of Health and Nutrition Sciences at Brooklyn College. And I am chair of our research committee, and in that role, I am delighted to welcome you all to this very exciting talk, The History of Vanilla, with Rosa Abreu-Runkel, who's assistant professor at City Tech, our sister Brooklyn school in CUNY. And so she will give us a, I hope, intoxicating talk about vanilla. I'm very excited about this. Professor Abreu-Runkel is, as I said, at City Tech, and she has over 19 years of hospitality management experience, working with multinational hotels, in middle and senior management positions in the areas of food and beverage. And Professor Abreu-Runkel teaches at City Tech, and some of the courses she teaches are perspectives in hospitality management, business travel, as well as tourism and dining room operation. And she also teaches perspectives in hospitality management, specific courses, dining room operations, and business travel and tourism. You can find more information on City Tech's website. I'm actually tempted to go back to school for a degree in hospitality management, but Professor Abreu-Runkel has an associate's in marketing and sales, and she also has a degree in hospitality management from City Tech, and then she also has a degree from City College. And in addition to her work and long experience in the food industry and hospitality, she's also currently collaborating with our own Melissa Fuster. Professor Fuster is leading the Latin American Restaurants in Action Project, and Professor Abreu-Runkel and Professor Fuster are collaborating on that project. So with that, and I will say that it was Professor Fuster who invited and suggested this talk to us, and we were, of course, delighted to welcome. So welcome, Rosa Abreu-Runkel. Delighted to have you here, and I'm going to stop sharing my my screen here so that you can pull up your slides. And without further ado, I think, just for format, again, the talk is being recorded. So, but during the talk, it will only be Professor Abreu-Runkel's image that's shown. And then after about half an hour talk, we will open up for questions. And feel free to type your questions in the chat during the talk, and then we will address them at the end. So welcome and enjoy.
So thank you for that introduction, Dr. Horlick-Romanowski, and I would like to thank the Department of Health and Nutrition Sciences of Brooklyn College, as well as Dr. Fuster, for inviting me here on this talk. So just give me a second. And obviously, like everything else, when you try to share, everything is goes awry. You could just give me one moment, please.
Take your time, not to worry. And again, I just want to remind our attendees to use the chat, type questions so that we can begin to collect the questions. Maybe also share what brought you here. We have an audience that includes both our own students and faculty and staff, but we also have guests from elsewhere, and that's super exciting. So we'd love to know who's in the audience. All right, that looks perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So this question of vanilla, how did I came about into writing this particular topic was something that just came about in a Wall Street Journal article that I was reading in this scarcity of vanilla and how global warming was affecting the demand, the production itself. And so when I was researching for a topic for actually to write, that was the topic that came into mind. And also it was my growing up around vanilla that I put the two and two together, and I decided, well, this is it. This is the topic that I am going to concentrate about. And so in specifically in the Dominican Republic where I was born, as a young child, I remember my mother. She actually did a lot of desserts, and these desserts were basically around Dominican vanilla. So if you ever around Dominican desserts, especially the cakes, the Dominican cakes, it will have this very strong sweet smell that we know it as Dominican vanilla. So, diving into vanilla itself, and we're around vanilla so much that we don't even realize that there's a specific language around vanilla. So when someone says to you, "You're so vanilla," that means that you're bland. And how does vanilla, who has had a history of being such an exotic flavoring, has become so ordinary and so bland in our world? So, going to start a little bit with the biology of vanilla, just to understand what we're dealing with in terms of the what we call the bean or the actual pod. So it could be the bean or the pod. So this is actually the the parts of the plant itself that we're looking at. And in terms of vanilla, we say that it is the only edible orchid in the world. Now, you can go ahead and go eat an orchid and you're going to become absolutely sick. So yes, you can eat an orchid, but you're not going to get sick. And it's a plant that actually flowers and has and produces a bean. So the way vanilla happened to be in the biology of it. First, I want to start with the Totonac, with the indigenous people of Mexico. And the Totonacs actually adapted vanilla as being part of their culture. They identify as vanilla being given to the gods, to their people. And so the Totonacs have had stories that are handed down from generation to generation. And one of them is on how vanilla came to their culture was this um, this princess that is actually born out of the goddess of fertility, Satnat. And Satnat became enamored with a human mortal. And because she knew that she was unable to be with this person that she loved and, and could not live among humans, she decided to turn herself into a vine, a vanilla vine. So for the Totonacs, this symbol of her becoming a vanilla vine that was given to them, it's a symbol of love, and it's a symbol of eternal love to them and to them as humans from Satnat, and also the goddess of fertility. So vanilla itself, it is part of the orchidans family, and it is the second largest flowering plant in the world. So so for those who are into the sciences, it is part of the planted kingdom, which is 80% of all the flowering plants. So vanilla is part of the family of legumes. The legumes, we're talking about beans, we're talking about soybeans, we're talking about peanuts, and we're talking about peas, and we're talking about lentils. In the flower itself, it's in the realms of the alfalfa. Alfalfa is part, again, of that particular family. So when it comes to the variety itself, there's three prominent varieties that then hybrids come about. And these particular prominent varieties, the Panfolia, the Pompona, and the Tahitian. And there are 110. So now it's been discovered there's 110 varieties of vanilla, and there's 25,000 hybrids that exist in the world, and obviously they continue to evolve. So when it comes to the plant itself, they need to have tropical climates, cannot be too hot. They need to be well drained in the soil. They need to have, many farmers, what they do, because now they're farming. What they do is they use tutor trees, and tutor trees are the ones that they actually cling to, and they climb around the tree itself. They're also corn, right? Corn is used as a tutor for the vine itself. The vine is delicate. It is also plagued by disease, by beetles or caterpillars that eat the plant, especially the actual leaves, and many times rust will kill the plant if rust actually develops, if they're over water. When it comes to their pollination, the pollination is a twofold. So the pollination itself, you have the plant, and the actual flower the plant itself flowers on its own. What happens with the pollination? The pollination is done naturally in the wild, is by bees. So the bees themselves, what happens to the bees, right? So they're actually gathered around by the natives and the indigenous back in those days. And the bee itself, we see a picture of the Inglosinine bee. And this is the actual bee that it's the only one that is able to get into the flower itself because it's so small inside. And so when they get inside, they're looking for food. And so the plant has, or the flower has, both male, female, in terms of the organs. So when the bee goes in looking for food, they get into the sticky pollen itself, right? It goes on their body, and they continue to go into the flower to get food. And when they come out, they actually pollinate. They actually pollinate the flower itself. What happens with that? It is that now there's a 12-hour period that these flowers need to be pollinated, or else they simply die and there's no fruit coming out of it. So the growing season is about 6 weeks, right? In terms of the flowers, and they actually go in clusters, and they actually begin to die off if they're not pollinated, and that's the end of that. When they're pollinated, they have 9 months to produce fruit. So there is this comparison that vanilla plant is just like humans, right? They have 9 months to actually produce a human being, a child. And so the vine, they have 9 months to actually produce a full-blown pod that is actually edible. So when they actually mature, as we can see here from the picture, they begin green, and then they slowly start to get to yellow, to this brownish color at the end in the image. And when they actually turn brownish, they split. They split, and what happens with the split? They have this particular smell of bitter almonds, and they begin to actually drip of oil. And this particular oil is called balsamic oil, or in the market they actually sell it as vanilla absolute, and it's extremely um, exclusive oil that comes from the pot itself. So, so in terms of the pot, when it becomes brown, now they begin to get into these crystals inside and out, these microscopic crystals. In these crystals, it is basically the compound called vanillin. Okay, and this is the aroma that we all smell out of vanilla. Many chemists will say that it has this nutty smell, this dusty and smoky smell. Obviously, commercially, you cannot allow the actual bean to mature on the vine, so they're picked green. And the way the farmers stop the process of beans or pots of maturing is what they do is they actually start to cure them. They cure the beans, and depending on the country, if we're talking about Indonesia, what they do, they smoke the actual beans from stopping from them to getting mature, to mature and turn brown. Mexico, they actually put it out into the sun, into mats to cure. Here we have a farmer picking up the actual beans, and this is how they look like on the vine. And here is how they actually put it out into the sun to slowly to begin to cure the beans. There's also a method which is called the potier method, and this particular method is very expensive. What they do is that they immerse the actual beans in rum, and for about 20 to 30 days, so that way it stops, right? That maturing process stops, so it doesn't go quickly, and then they bring it out, and in hoping that it doesn't get moldy, and so again, depending on the country that it is produced, the curing process is it's different from one country to another. On the biology part of, so this is part of the drying process right there. And so that's the biology of it. And when we talk about the history, it is such an interesting history about vanilla itself, in terms of how we came about, how humans came about adapting this pot into our world. So the vanilla beans have been around for 70 million years, and it grew wildly, wild in from the Guyanas to Central America to North America, and I mean North America and Mexico. And it's been used by humans from 2,000 to 3,000 years. How did it come about? This is a speculation that the fruit just simply dropped out of the vines, and there was human curiosity, and it was actually picked up, and here we go. We actually started using the actual beans. But however, the beans themselves were used very differently of how we use it today. They were used as incense for the temples of the gods. So they were mixed in with a resin of a pine tree for that particular incense. So vanilla was revered. It was not an everyday thing by the indigenous people. These indigenous cultures, like the Olmecs, which is called the mother culture of Mexico and parts of Central and South America, the Toltecs the Mayans, and the Aztecs. And obviously, the main indigenous group that adapted vanilla as their identity was the Totonacs. So what happened in 1520, not in 1521, I'm sorry, with the Columbian Exchange, when Columbus came into the world, something in 1592 that was so important in history is that he brought goods from Europe into this unknown land and introduced, besides obviously disease, he introduced products. And he also took products from this land to Europe, and that became what we call the Columbian Exchange, because there was obviously a lot of plants and animals and that were exchanged at that particular period. And this is where slowly now vanilla goes into Europe. So 1521, Mexico was conquered by Hernan Cortez. The conquistadors come around. They're looking for gold, as we all know. And so the actual indigenous people who join in Cortez to defeat the Aztecs, they wanted the Aztecs out. Why? Because the Aztecs were cruel to them. They used them as human sacrifices, and they actually joined in to defeat them. What did they find? The Cortez find this advanced culture in Montezuma's court. In advanced cultures, there's buildings, there's rivers, there's scholars, there's carpenters, there's a whole entire culture that they were actually surprised to find. So Montezuma invites Cortez and his people for a banquet, and the Spaniards look at and actually see this particular brew that they're drinking, and this brew is thick, and they try it, and it's bitter and it's nasty. Um, and they actually notice that Montezuma is actually drinking all of these cups of this horrible brew, right? And Bernardo de Castillo, which was one of the soldiers of Hernan Cortez, he's actually watching to see what is it that they're putting in this particular brew that the Aztecs drinking, especially Montezuma. And obviously in the brew you got chili, you got cocoa, and you have vanilla. And they were like, wow. So so Montezuma is drinking this concoction for virility. He had more than 50 wives. So the indigenous people, the Aztecs, were using it as an aphrodisiac in back in those days. So with the Spanish they come scientists, they come missionaries, and one of the missionaries that come along, his name is Francisco Friar Bernardino de Sahagun. So he's a friar. He starts living with the indigenous people. He starts watching and looking at how they have the medicines to treat their people, and he makes notations in this particular diary about how vanilla is used for for the disease of spitting of the blood. um, he puts together all of these remedies that are used with vanilla and without, and he puts together a book called the Florentine Cordes. And this particular book was published 264 years after his death, right? Amazingly. And then they discovered, all of these uses of indigenous medicine in this particular book. So the King of Spain decides to send his own emissary, Francisco Hernandez, who actually continues to live about 4 years with the indigenous population and discovering all of the medicinal plants that they use. And he finds that the indigenous population, or the doctors of the indigenous population, are using vanilla for urine flow. They're using it for snake bites. They're using it for female troubles, as they say. So, um, obviously my Mesoamerican cultures are there, and we have Hernan Cortez there. And now we go into vanilla going into Europe. So the vines were taken over to Europe. There's a curiosity, not of the actual bean itself. It doesn't take off it doesn't take off right away. However, the plant itself, by horticulturists and scientists in Europe, they start looking at this. And this particular gentleman, who is called Charles Morin, he begins to look at it and go, I can actually come up with the best vanilla bean that it's going to come out of, in the world. So he starts studying the plant, and he actually discovers, and nobody else did, that the plant needed to be pollinated in order to produce the fruit. However, his studies doesn't go anywhere, does not, and that is becomes in obscurity uh, in history, and nobody remembers about this particular discoveries and his writings about the vanilla plant. So now we come into this specific gentleman. So this particular gentleman, this picture that you're looking at, his name is Albius, right? His he's basically just called Albius, and when the Europeans, specifically the French and the English, wanted to finish the monopoly of vanilla, they already had colonies somewhere else that had the same climate as Mexico. So what they did was they took cuttings of the vine and they took it to Reunion Island, which back then it was called Bourbon. Okay, Bourbon vanilla, French, right? French vanilla does not exist. So Bourbon Island, which is now called Reunion Island, this is where the cuttings were taken to. So they were the vine itself did produce flowers, uh, but no fruit whatsoever. So this particular gentleman, Albius, he and the plantation owner of Reunion Island were just absolutely, obsessed. Specifically, this gentleman called Beaumont. He was a horticulturist who owned Albius, and he had a vanilla vine that lasted about 22 years, didn't produce any fruit. Albius was actually a 12-year-old slave boy in Reunion at the time. So he was following his master around, and he began playing around with the vine itself, with the actual flower. And what he did was, Edmund put in a small little bamboo stick into the flower, and it began to produce fruit. So when Beaumont, walking around, found that this 22-year-old vine had fruit, he was like, what happened? How did this happen? And Albius actually said, this is what I did. And he was like, you? How? I'm a scientist. There's European scientists that are actually studying how to do this. How you did it? And he explained to them how he did it. And they couldn't believe it. They actually could not believe it. So here is the mass produced of vanilla process that is born. Albius now is called Edmund. He's a free man of what he actually discovered. And what happens with Albius? We're talking about more than $1 billion business. Albius actually dies a free man in jail. He does not see anything of what he's done and it's, and now we're into a multi-billion-dollar business. So from the picture, this is how it is actually pollinated by hand, and this is the flower. And we go into someone across the pond. The actual, the apothecary of Queen Elizabeth I, Hugh Morgan, he's basically the one that actually adapts vanilla into her food. Okay, so I call Queen Elizabeth, that she was the Kim Kardashian of her times, because she actually was the one that set precedents when it came to fashion. So once, she adapted vanilla into her food, everyone in her court soon enough followed. Also in Europe, you had Casanova. Casanova, actually, he was the one that had a confectionery. He actually did a little confection made of out of the hairlock of a lover with vanilla in it. So talk about foods, talk about romance, and talk about everything else under the sun. Vanilla is part of it. So we come into America, and here is Thomas Jefferson. He becomes the emissary for the United States in Paris, and Thomas Jefferson becomes enthralled and falls in love with vanilla itself. Thomas Jefferson then, when he moves back to the States, he is a request from the Americans back in Paris to send him bundles of vanilla. And obviously, with Thomas Jefferson comes, the famous vanilla ice cream recipe the recipe that we know. With Thomas Jefferson, somebody in Washington that is very famous was Dolly Madison. And if you have seen it in the supermarkets, Dolly Madison ice cream was it's an ice cream now, but she also served in her many state dinners vanilla ice cream and other ice creams as well. So the vine itself, again, bourbon, uh, which is the what we see as French vanilla, took off. And what happens after this is that then the chemists and the scientists even go further into the chemical compounds that is more than 250 chemical compounds in the actual bean itself. So in 1847, we have Joseph Burnett. He's a chemist, and he develops the first vanilla extract. So if you actually take a vanilla bean that you actually purchase from the supermarket and you dip it into alcohol, it dilutes and it becomes brown, and there you go. You have vanilla extract. In 1874, we have two Germans, Tiemann and Wilhelm, that they developed the first synthetic vanilla. The first synthetic. So this is the imitation vanilla that we see. So synthetic vanillin is actually comes from, surprising enough, the imitation that you actually get in the supermarkets, and this is why it's inexpensive, comes from the bark of the pine tree, right? From the pulp, so it's from the pulp of the trees that actually synthetic vanilla comes in, right? That we see. You also have, and I'm going to pronounce this, and it's actually was stopped and used because it was inhumane, Casternium, which is actually the glands of the beavers, right, of the beaver sacs, and because it was inhumane, the practice of killing beavers for this particular the sacs themselves was stopped. So you also have clove oil that is also used as a replacement and imitation for vanilla. Another one that is actually, it is illegal in the United States, is called tonka beans. And tonka beans has a specific chemical called coumadin, and it causes tonka beans is also a hallucinogen, and I'm not pronouncing that right, but you can actually get a little high from it. But this particular chemical in it could cause liver damage. What happens again with vanilla? Once it becomes imitation, it is mass produced not only on the vine, but now it is mass produced for everybody else, right? So here's the pine. Now we go into production, mass production of it. So what happens is that Dr. Pemberton was the person who actually was wounded in battle, and he wants to find a way on how to stop using morphine for his pain, and he develops this syrup. And this syrup obviously has coca from coca leaves, but he also adds other ingredients, including vanilla, into this particular syrup. Dr. Pemberton, he, sold the rights to the company into what is now Coca-Cola, and the actual recipe was uh, alternated, not to have obviously Coke, the coca leaves themselves in the recipe, but it's still vanilla is still part of it. So again, World War II, we're looking at our soldiers overseas, and they become homesick. And what happens in World War II? The government decides to send an entire ship full of ice cream to our troops to boost their morale, right? So they're excited. They actually are able to get some ice cream while they're fighting the war. And in terms of the vanilla profile itself, we see a lot of products that are part of, including the culture. And I started off with You're So Vanilla. In the culture itself, we also have what is vanilla sex, and we talk about your chocolate and I'm vanilla, right? And also we got Vanilla Ice, right? The popular rapper. We have movies that are actually named after vanilla, Vanilla Sky, right? So and we also have vanilla music, the syrupy, Frankie Avalon kind of music that is actually called vanilla. Vanilla itself in the music. So how we come about into this vanilla products, right? Vanilla is in everything. And if you sit back and think about it, it is in candles, in shampoos, it's in yogurts, it's in pastries, it's in perfumes, it's in medicines. It's Hershey has obviously vanilla in their chocolate. Now comes the McCormick's, um, and other companies that adapt vanilla in their repertoire. And who are the countries that actually produce vanilla? Initially, it was Mexico. They had a monopoly of 200 plus years. The Europeans tried to stop it, put it in reunion. Now it's mass produced, and now you have vanilla that it is done throughout the world. India produces vanilla. China produces vanilla. Puerto Rico at one point had vanilla plantations. So there was the experimentation of vanilla plantations in Puerto Rico, but the hurricanes killed the vines and that experiment ended. So now there's still the experiment of Florida, using Florida's uh, climate to produce vanilla as well here in the United States. So you have small productions in Hawaii, and you have Samoa as also of producing vanilla. And again, we have vanilla you could use, and if you want to, look in my book. I have recipes that are savory. It goes good with eggs. It goes good with It goes good with a salad dressing. So it does complement outside of the sweets. Vanilla can also be used as savory. So that's my other facts. And so again, vanilla, who would have known that vanilla was so important? It is the second most expensive spice after saffron. It is called the black gold. And this is my acknowledgement here. So if we think about in terms now of vanilla, now there's a whole different thought about what vanilla is and how it is and so important it is in our lives. And we never have realized it. So thank you so much. And I'm opening it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Abreu-Runkel. That was fascinating. Really appreciate it. I definitely want ice cream now. So let's see. I maybe, and feel free, audience, to chime in with questions. I'm in the process of reading the book, so I do take a bite at a time. It's very rich and very and studded with information and anecdotes. So I see that we have a question here. So David Rivera asked, I noticed when I buy vanilla beans, they're given a letter grade A, B, etc. Can you explain the qualities they're graded on?
And thank you. And I want to say, I want to thank New York City College of Technology, Hospitality Management. I see a lot of our students here.
Yeah.
And, and my colleagues that actually contributed in some of the recipes of the book. So David, to answer the question is that these particular grades is depending on the shine and the moisture of the beans. So grade 8 or fancy, depending on the country, is the best. And so according to that particular grade, that is the particular the quality itself of the vanilla, and that's how those grades come about.
Okay, wonderful. So here's a question for me. Catherine asked when the video is going to be posted on YouTube. As soon as we render the video, so it takes a few days and then for us to upload it. We will send out, I will make sure that I send out the link to all attendees, and we'll also share it on social media. So if you follow us, BC Health Sci on Instagram and on Twitter, we'll send out the link to our YouTube video as well. Any other questions? So, so Billy asked that you mentioned vanilla in everyday foods such as eggs and salad dressing. Can you provide a recipe? Broad strokes.
So the recipes actually is in my book where you're able to obtain it. So just to give you a quick one is scrambled eggs. What you do is you scramble the eggs and you incorporate vanilla, the actual bean itself. You have to buy the bean and scrape it off into a small amount, and you scramble the eggs in there and a little salt and pepper, and there you go. That's a savory dish. And I have in the book itself, you could get it. Thank you. Carla is actually putting it out. Barnes & Noble. Thank you, Terry. Barnes & Noble, you actually online, you actually can get the book, as well as Amazon. You'll be able to go and get the book as well.
And it's called the Edible Series, Vanilla, A Global History. So yes, look for it on Amazon. So Roseanne also shared, Professor Schnoll is one of our colleagues at Brooklyn College, also shared that that there are medicinal properties of vanilla as an antibacterial and anti-cancerous or anti-tumor activity, antidepressant, and antioxidant. So thank you for that. I have a question about, so I think one of the probably most contentious and disputed histories of American history is sort of the history of vanilla ice cream. And I've been reading up on sort of adjacent reading, like who brought vanilla ice cream? We like to know these origins and myths. But so did Thomas Jefferson develop ice cream, vanilla ice cream? And can you talk a little bit about that?
As I mentioned, Thomas Jefferson is recognized for this vanilla ice cream recipe. But what happens is that when he goes to Europe as the representative of the United States, he brings over James Hemings, who is a relative of Sally Hemings, who he has children with, and he is actually the cook for for uh, for him. So what happens is that Hemings becomes the first American to be trained in the culinary arts, in French culinary arts. He's the first American. He's not recognized as, but he is the first. And when I was doing research on the book, the Hemings Foundation, there is a particular chef that he is actually writing about him, and I say our conclusion came that it was not Thomas Jefferson that wrote this recipe. It was not Thomas Jefferson that cooked the ice cream. Why? Because he's not in the kitchen. He's not in the kitchen. And obviously, Hemings is not recognized because he's a slave, and Thomas Jefferson is recognized for the recipe itself. So in our conversations, that's what we really believe, that it was Hemings behind this recipe.
Wow, thank you. And then there's also like mysteries around vanilla. So you mentioned something called the vanilla murders. Can you elaborate?
Well, it's unfortunate. What happens is that, and we're talking about where the production of vanilla on the farmer level, the farmers themselves, they have to be quite vigilant. Once the pods are produced on the vine, they are stolen, and they have to guard the vanilla. And what happens is, if someone perpetrates into their property, they actually get killed. And this is what is called vanilla murders for that particular reason, because on the farmer level, they don't make a lot of money. It is on the wholesaler level that they do. So the farmers pick up the beans green and they give it to the actual wholesaler. And the wholesaler can cure the beans or give it to somebody else to cure. So the farmers are making just pennies. But however, this is their production. And just to add to it, who are really producing this besides the farmer? It's the family. It's the women and children that are out there hours on end, actually pollinated by hand. It cannot done by a machine. And this is why vanilla is so expensive. It's hand pollinated, it's hand picked, it has to be cured. And on top of that, now you have global warming that are destroying the vines. The hurricanes are actually destroying the vines.
Wow. So global warming is also threatening our vanilla supply. Let's see. Right. So a lot of the demands obviously affect the small farmers and the production end of things. I'm curious about, and this obviously is not in your book because you wrote it before the pandemic, but one of the things that has happened as part of the pandemic is that vanilla prices have been affected and demand has been affected. Do you know anything about that?
Well, first, the demand it started to skyrocket when there was consumers became more aware of wanting to eat healthy, not having any chemicals in their food. So this is where slowly starts to, in the 80s, it begins that an increase for demand, and companies now like the McCormick's begin to use the real vanilla instead of synthetic. And again, global warming, but however, there's more people baking. at home. There's more cooking at home. So there's more of a demand. I'm sure everybody remembers going to the supermarket and you can't find flour. People were they're baking cakes and cookies and all kinds of pastries. So yes, so you're not going to find the items that are necessary to bake with, especially sweet desserts.
Wow. Yeah, who would have thought? But yes, it's probably the baking demand that has. So is it good to be vanilla farmer right now?
It is. It's best to be the middleman, not the farmer, to be honest, because it is. They don't earn a lot of money. It is backbreaking work. They have to be vigilant for weeks. The flowers they come out within a 6 weeks time, and they have to keep an eye on the vine so that they're not pulled by someone else, right? That they're stealing the actual beans before they mature. And sometimes they, out of fear, they pick it and they're not fully mature because they're afraid of losing their livelihoods uh, to to a thief. And the unfortunate part, sometimes in these countries, the governments are pretty corrupt. The local government.
Right. Right. Well, thank you. Um, a food fraught with history of subjugation and colonization, and which continues. Other questions? So Terry has a question about why there aren't vanilla farms all over the world.
Uh, they're not all over the world because of the climate itself. So, in India can sustain. Parts of China can sustain the climate. So it's if it has to be like a Florida, Hawaii, Mexico environment in order for them to grow. So that they cannot grow in a cold climate. It's not possible.
And does it have to do with the soil qualities, or is it primarily the climate?
It is both. It has to be well drained. It has to be fertilized. Um, in the wild, fertilization comes from, obviously the trees. It comes from whatever it is on the forest floor. But if you do have a farm, you have to fertilize it, and you have to keep it in a controlled temperature. If you're in a specific country that does not sustain the weather itself for the vines to survive. There's a story, and I don't believe it's in the book, where they brought the vine into the Paris Museum back in the 1800s, and there was a malfunction in the heating where the vine was. It got cold, it froze, and it died, and that was the end of that. And that's when they were experimenting with the vine in Europe.
So it did not grow well in Paris.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. That's fascinating information. Any other questions before we wrap up? I see we have from the beginning, Diamond, thank you for sharing that you grew up in Grenada, and that it was you love everything about vanilla, and that it was essential to growing up in the Caribbean basin. Yeah, lots of fascinating information. I invite you, the link to the book is in the chat. We can share it one more time. Thank you, Terry, for finding that. And also the link to our department's social media, I put in the chat as well. We are working on being more communicative on social media. And as I said, we will also circulate a link to those who registered for the webinar today to the video once we post it on YouTube, which should be, I hope, no later than Monday next week. It takes a moment to render it and to then upload it. So I want to thank you again, Professor Abreu-Runkel, for speaking with us today. And really, I must go out and buy ice cream. And I thank everyone who was here. This is one of the best showings we've had for one of our talks, which tells me that we should talk more about food. So I'm making mental notes of that. And thank you to everyone from City Tech and elsewhere who attended. We love seeing our fellow CUNY people in our talks. And so stay in touch, follow us on social media again, go get the book, read more about vanilla, and we will take the liberty to invite you to our next talks coming up. They're not quite as palatable, so to speak. They're not about food, but they're about people and the science of health and risk of disease. And then we have, so our next talk is on April 27th that talks about social determinants and nutrition. And then we have a talk in May from one of our professors emeritus who has written a book about death, dying, and bereavement. So you can see we span the entire breadth of, what do we call it? Food, living, and dying. But there you have it. That is the breadth of our department. So thank you again to everyone who attended. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you again, Rosa Abreu-Runkel, for speaking with us today, and do stay in touch. So applause all around.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your support.
Attending. And I'm going to